All right, folks, welcome back to Wade Plim. Haven't been on the channel in a little bit, but I'm going to try to keep consistent on it. I have been wanting to cover pro wrestling. Didn't feel like it was the right place to cover it on my main channel, so I'm going to cover it here. And if you guys like it, make sure you subscribe. I used to do a lot more wrestling on this channel, and then, kind of got away from it. Life happens. It is what it is. But I want to jump back into covering. I won't be doing weekly episode reviews of SmackDown and Raw. If something happens on the show that's worth talking about, we'll do it here. I mostly want to talk about all of the news surrounding the pro wrestling scene and the bigger names in it and the biggest happenings in it, the controversial issues, everything around this wacky and wild business we call professional wrestling. And this week, Hulk Hogan's Real American documentary came out, and a lot of people are talking about it. I wanted to talk about it myself because if anything that we have learned about the Hulkster over the years, was he probably the biggest and most important name in professional wrestling from the 80s up until now? Yeah, he definitely is. He changed the business in ways that we never would have had if not for Hulk Hogan. But is he also one of the most complicated, flat out lying, strange people potentially you could ever build the business around? Yeah, absolutely. He was a massive liar. He ratted on the boys a lot. He for sure has made up a lot more history than actually happened, and throughout it all, he has found a way to get his way. All in all, Hulk Hogan will be remembered. Obviously, as everybody knows now, Hogan has passed on, so rest in peace to the Hulkster. But this documentary showed a couple of different sides of Hogan that you may not have known if you didn't watch in the 80s, or maybe if you didn't follow him outside of pro wrestling after he retired. But all in all, it was a very surface level review of what Hulk actually was that didn't cover some of the topics maybe people wanted to see and covered a little more of things people didn't want to see. What do I mean? Let's talk about it. The Hulk Hogan documentary review, but not in depth, because this thing wasn't in depth. The breakdown, let's go. All right, so the documentary, it is a 4-part series on Netflix. Chapter 1's called The Rise, Chapter 2, Hulkamania, Chapter 3, Hollywood Hogan, and Chapter 4, Hulk versus Terry. Now, in most of this entire documentary, you get the sense that Hogan very much stumbled into professional wrestling. And when he did, it was after he had really no idea that this was what was going to be his career, even though he says he thought it may happen that way. And he says he went to matches when he was a child and that that's what he wanted to do. There was no indication from Hogan's early life until the point he got into professional wrestling business that was what he wanted to do, right? He came from a family where his father was hardworking, kind of a hard-nosed father, hard-nosed family, not a lot of emotion in said family. And he grows up as the younger brother of two, and he, in his mind, the brother that was looked down upon by not only the older brother, but apparently his own dad. But The Rise, Chapter 1, talks about how Hogan got into the business. And again, I'm not going to keep the Hogan lie counter on there for you guys, because I'm sure there was a lot, but he goes over a lot of his initial happenstances, like him being the bassist, right? He played guitar, and some of the boys that were wrestling in the territory he was in around the Tampa area were bringing him to shows and trying to get him into the business, and him going and training for a bit. And there's cameos from everybody from, Linda Hogan to Natty Neidhart to Kevin Nash, Cody Rhodes, Triple H is in this document, Bret Hart is in this documentary, Eric Bischoff. So they got a good amount of people to speak on Hogan's behalf and or speak about it. Donald Trump is in this documentary, which is that's a president of the United States. And we'll get to that part in just a little bit. But and then there's bits and pieces from Vince McMahon in audio form, but no sit down of him until like the very, very end, I think, of the documentary. There's also parts of this that are, Nick, his son, like I said, Linda. Brooke Hogan is not featured anywhere in this outside of, old VHS tapes of her as a kid, and then some voice stuff, and then from the reality show later on, and then Hogan's second wife. So there's a Bruce Pritchard, Bob Costas are all there as well. There's a who's who, right, to tell the story of Hulk Hogan, but also Hulk himself, who throughout this documentary, when things do get to be a little personal, whether it's, the passing of his brother or the talk about, his divorce with his wife or all these things, he tends to be a little bit more choked up and doesn't really want to broach that subject, which is kind of, I think, the biggest issue for a lot of people that watch this was that we didn't really get a new look at Hulk Hogan here. Like maybe he was a bit more honest and we saw a little bit more of Terry Bollea, who, that's Hulk's actual birth name, Terry Bollea. Maybe we got a little bit more of him in this documentary, but we didn't really, get into the nitty gritty of like what made Terry tick until maybe the end parts. But even then we didn't really get his thoughts on the entire, racial remark situation. We didn't really get his thoughts on certain happenings during even the steroid trial, which, he talked about a little bit, but then he also goes into some diatribes about how he got Arsenio Hall his job and all this other stuff. We didn't really get the finer details of how he dealt with a lot of these bad situations that happened to him and that he caused. But we just get some light sprinklings of them. And I get it. It's a 4-part series. Are you going to be able to tell that story in that amount of time? I don't know. But like I said, I think that was the big disappointment if people were upset leaving this, was that we just kind of played the greatest hits of Hulk Hogan, which is kind of cool if you weren't around during the 80s, which I wasn't. It is cool to see the evolution of they didn't say it, but Sterling Gold was one of Hulk's old euphemisms as a wrestler. Before Terry the Hulk, Boulder, and all that stuff, Sterling Gold was out there, right? And we get to see that evolution of Terry Bollea to Hulk Hogan and his, work, right? His in-ring work getting somewhat better. His time in the Memphis territories to going all the way up to New York and working for Vince McMahon Sr., and then doing the Rocky movie, which again, Thunder Lips, massive, massive opportunity for him. He took it. And one thing you will learn about Hulk in this entire documentary, he was a massive opportunist in the best way possible. He jumped at opportunities. He said yes to opportunities. Now, it doesn't talk about how much he put himself over and buried some people to keep those opportunities as much. It does in the Bret Hart portion of this during the Hollywood Hogan arc, and which is awesome, by the way. I think it might have been right before the Hollywood Hogan arc, actually. But it's awesome seeing Bret anytime he gets on these talking head spots because he just is the most honest person. I think it was during the Hulkamania stuff, yeah. So anyway, you get to see the evolution of Hulk. You get to see him, figure out a lot of who he is as a pro wrestler and some of who he is as a person, I would say. Not necessarily fully who he is as a person, but you go from the time where Vince Sr. brings him in to his territory to Hulk leaving to do the Rocky movie, to then Vince Jr. taking over his dad's territory and essentially looking for that big name, looking for that one superstar to create his vision, which at the time Vince Jr. wanted to go national with pro wrestling and get out of this territory mindset, which you can argue is the best and potentially worst thing to happen to professional wrestling because the territories kept things as separate products and kept competition alive and, kept certain things in the professional wrestling business kayfabed and X, Y, and Z. And from that moment, obviously you commercialize wrestling, you take it national, and then your vision, if you're Vince McMahon Jr., becomes the entire vision for pro wrestling, right? It becomes what pro wrestling is versus what just your vision is. And that was all based around the fact that Hulk Hogan was going to be his babyface, his guy, his real American hero, right? Not Bob Backlund, not some of these other guys that have been relied upon in just that Northeast territory. But for a nationwide audience, one of the smartest things, you have to give him credit, Vince McMahon Jr. ever did was bringing back Hulk Hogan and strapping him to a rocket and sending him to the moon, because you bring him back, you have him fight or wrestle the Iron Sheik during a time where, much like today, the U.S. and Iran have crazy high tensions. You're trying to build on the patriotic nature of Americans during that time frame. And you put the belt on Hulk and you let him run with it. And it is truly, I will say again, it's truly magnificent to see how much of a fever pitch pro wrestling was at during this Hulkamania run, right? You get the rise of Hulk. You see him, like I said, learning how to wrestle, becoming a wrestler, being called the shits by a lot of people. And not understanding and not being a great athlete, and then, working on his craft. Fair play to him. Hulk was a worker in terms of him getting better. He learned how to work in the business, and he had a great look, and he was this massive individual. And it's really cool again to see all these like old school tapes of promos and hype jobs and packages and all these things, and even the home tapes from Hulk and his family, because you don't really see that anymore. We're in an age where technology has evolved so much that you can see everything in 4K HD, but nothing really has that personal touch. Nothing can tell you that story of like where you were to where you went. I mean, you can, but it just doesn't feel the same. I don't know. The nostalgia factor was hitting for me. But during that, you see probably Hogan's best attribute. Not even probably, his best attribute. You see him working on his promos. You see the Hulk character come together. Let me tell you something, brother. And just going off and cutting these things off the cuff. No script, no nothing, just Hulk working. And that's one of the things that I think is missing in today's pro wrestling. Not that Hulk was the realest wrestler ever. He was probably the most cartoonish, action figure-y wrestler you could make. But when he spoke, there was such energy and there was such passion. And he was this big, monstrous dude, and you could get behind it, right? And you have a lot of cookie-cutter wrestlers now cutting cookie-cutter promos for SmackDown, Raw, whatever it is, and they all sound the same. No one sounded like Hulk. I mean, Randy Savage did after a little bit, but Hulk was his own thing, and you just couldn't replicate the energy. He say what you want about Hulk, 10 out of 10 promo, and Bret Hart even says he had one of the best promos that's ever. He's probably the best promo in the wrestling business history, and I have to agree with him. And so you see that, and then you see Hulkamania start to really run wild. You see again, the expansion of Vince McMahon Jr. and Hulk taking over the entire wrestling business and, running the business and starting WrestleMania, and him and Mr. T and WrestleMania 2 and 3, and Hulk just headline, him versus Andre. And yes, throughout all of this, you're seeing Hulk still embellish the truth a little bit about how, he didn't know what was going to happen in the match with Andre. He didn't know he was going to slam him. He was just there, and what happened. I think the slam was always planned. Hulk was not the first to do it, and he was the first to do it maybe in front of that big of an audience, but it was still a moment that no one that ever saw it live would ever forget. And even, again, a pro wrestling fan of today, you go back and look at that, and it's like, holy cow. The pop, the crowd, the investment, that was the charisma of Hulk Hogan. And also Andre the Giant, right? The eighth wonder of the world. So those two put together, a match made in heaven. It wouldn't get over the same today because we've been inoculated to the wrestling business a bit. Like we need to see something else. We've seen so much already, and because kayfabe is dead, and because of technology and everything else. But at the time, that was a match. But what else in this documentary? I mean, again, throughout it, you get all the happenings of Hulk, and you even get people that weren't massive fans of Hulk. You get people like Jesse Ventura, again, Bret Hart, speaking, I would say Kevin Nash, speaking fairly complimentary at times. I mean, Bret shot on him a little bit, but they speak fairly complimentary of Hulk. And Jesse Ventura, even at the very, very end, had a beautiful way of describing the kind of shocking announcement of Hulk's death, which we'll get to. But yeah, so you get all of that. You get the high points of Hogan's career. You get Hulkamania, and then you get the low points, right? You get the steroid trial and the fact that Hogan lied on Arsenio Hall's show and in various other places. But, of course, the show that Hulk got for Arsenio, as he tells the story. But you see him lie about taking steroids. You see him try to stick to that lie until Vince McMahon is subpoenaed. And Hulk's called to testify against him as a star witness, and then Hulk has to tell the truth. And even in that moment, it changed Hulk's career forever. It damn near tanked the entire WWF at that time. Almost put them out of business, that steroid trial. And so Hulk is obviously, not with the company anymore. It goes through the awful film and TV career of Hulk Hogan and what was it, Thunder in Paradise, and these just terrible, terrible shows and movies that he's a part of. He was never meant for the big screen in a lead role like that. But again, you have to give Hulk credit. There were not many other superstars or wrestlers transitioning to TV and movies, commercials, right? Those were usually, if you were going to do a athlete spot in those movies, they were reserved for football guys or boxers or whoever at the time, and Hulk kind of broke through. He was a massive global superstar. Even in the low points, you can see how much Hulkamania took over the world. For a pro wrestler at that time to be one of the most well-known men on the planet shows you the star power of Hulk Hogan. You can argue that he is the most important figure. Him and Vince McMahon are the most important figures in professional wrestling history for that time period and how the business changed from what it was in the territories to what it became through closed circuit, through pay-per-view, through WrestleMania, and all off the back of Hulk Hogan and Vince with the ideas around it. So anyway, Hulk leaves the WWF. He does his movie stint, and then the WCW era, right? The Hollywood Hulk Hogan era. Just because your time as a wrestler at the top and the cookie cutter, drink your milk and eat your vitamins kind of went by the wayside doesn't mean your career's over. The 90s were a time of revolution. They were a time of fighting back against the man, and they were a time of reinvention, right? And so in the WWE, that meant building new stars out with the old, corny, washed up, same gimmick wrestlers that no one believed anymore, and in with the new, in with the Stone Cold Steve Austins, in with the Rocks, in with the Triple H's, in with the new era. And if you're on WCW, while they were pioneering the same thing with the Outsiders and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, Hogan had to find his way in there as well. Eric Bischoff goes to one of those sets he's working on, the Universal lot there in Florida, and tells Hulk to come out of retirement and come to WCW. And the funny thing is, it doesn't mention in this documentary, but Hulk he didn't want to do it. Hulk did not want to go and wrestle at WCW. But eventually, I think he saw the popularity of this Outsiders angle, and when they brought him in, he was not a part of that. He was still doing the red and yellow and the All-American Hulk Hogan, and it just wasn't working. People looked at him, they saw how much skinnier he was, they saw how much older he looked. Let's not forget, he was, I think, 40 at the time, and they weren't going with it, brother, right? They were not having the same Hulk Hogan matches, the same smiling babyface after the steroid trial, after being off for so long and doing the same kind of washed up gimmick. Hulk needed a reinvention, and he didn't want to turn. At first, he did not want to turn heel. Again, one of the things about this documentary is it doesn't highlight the things that almost went wrong for Hulk. Some of them, they highlight what went wrong, but they don't highlight the fact that Hulk did not want to turn heel, that it was a very reluctant turn, and only if, with that creative control in his contract at WCW, one of the greatest deals a wrestler's ever signed, because Eric Bischoff essentially signed the company away to 3 separate wrestlers at a time, and Bret Hart, too. That was a terrible signing for them as well, even though, again, not necessarily anyone's fault, just happened to work out that way. It wasn't a terrible signing. It was more so just terrible creative after signing one of the biggest names they could have signed over, and a young, talented wrestler in Bret Hart. But nevertheless, Hulk does become part of the Outsiders, the infamous turn. It was amazing to see the actual heat, stuff you just can't get today, man. Like, people believed in Hulk Hogan as the ultimate good guy. And even if they were tired of it, just like they were probably tired of Hogan walking down to the ring thinking, oh God, here we go. Here's another Bret Hart and Yokozuna situation. Which, by the way, Bret laid out perfectly. He was like, oh yeah, Hulk coming to save me. The infamous Hulk beating Yokozuna and winning the title after Bret can't get it done. And he cheers on Hulk for no reason to walk out and win the belt. One of the worst booking decisions ever, because Vince was just so desperate to get back the Hulkamania, to get back the run that they had years earlier. It just wasn't working, and obviously Bret was like, fuck you, while he's drinking at the bar. That story was awesome. But people thought, oh gosh, here comes Hogan again to make it about himself after kind of a lackluster run in WCW, and gets to the ring, and instead of helping the baby faces, he drops the leg and turns and becomes one of the Outsiders. And again, brilliant move, revolutionary move. What Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were already doing in blurring the lines between, fiction and reality, Hulk was able to capitalize on. Again, an ultimate opportunist, and they ran with it. He dyed the beard. He became Hollywood Hogan. He absolutely changed his character, went full heel. They did insane ratings. Now, yeah, they hot-shotted a lot of it, and they made some terrible decisions along the way, like giving away him versus Goldberg on free TV in the Georgia Dome. I'm not mad at that decision because it went stupid and Goldberg won the belt, but they could have made a lot more money had he not. And then the finger poke of doom, and then the introduction of Vince Russo as the head writer at WCW. And again, just like everything else that we talked about with Hulk's career, that run came to a screeching halt and a probably one of the most unfortunate ends. But then again, Hulk was a made man. He was paid, and he moves on. So the Hollywood era is a very, very interesting one to look at. And while this is all going on, we're talking a lot about Hulk and his career, which most of you guys know. It's a very, like I said, surface level, hit the high point style. But what I did enjoy about this documentary was Hulk and his family. Yes, we've seen that before. If you watched Hogan Knows Best, the reality show on VH1 years ago. But before that, watching Terry at home, Hulk, be with his kids and love that time with them. And watching Linda before, honestly, on Hogan Knows Best, Linda was like kind of the kooky wife, right? We didn't really know about Linda. And you do get to see some of these home videos where she is a loving mother and she's there for her kids and she's raising those kids because Hogan's on the road 300 plus days. And you get a little bit of that struggle as him as a family man, or him trying to be a family man, while never really being home, and his kids. And this is a real reality of the wrestling business. Those kids are raised without you really ever being there. John Cena said it in his farewell tour. It was like Randy Orton was heckling him for not having any kids, and Cena turned to the crowd and said, "I couldn't be a dad, but I raised every one of your kids for 25 years. I was a better parent than you were for 20." Like, he was, there was obviously some work there, but it's a reality. Wrestlers don't get to be home that often, and that was a real struggle, it seemed like, for Hulk and for Linda too, in their marriage and the whole thing. And so it was an interesting light to look at things. It looked like, Brooke and Nick were definitely missing their father as kids. And then obviously they grow up, and once Hulk finishes up with WCW, he's at home for a long time, and he's able to actually be dad for a bit. And then from that point, you move on, and I think that's where we go to the reality show, right? We go from WCW to Hogan on Hogan Knows Best, because he's looking for ways to, make some money post-retirement. And that's where we find most of the family issues out on display. You see some of the world of Hulk Hogan start to crumble a bit. Not because of that show. That show looks like a happy family, being quirky and goofy, and Hulk, again, being Hulk. Actually, from that point, we go from the end of WCW, a couple of years off, Hogan gets to be at home with his family, all that. And then, so one of the cooler parts, I think, of the documentary, Hogan coming back to the WWE, which, again, it wasn't a great run for Hulk when he came back. Everybody remembers that. He, at this point, was I think, close to or nearing or in his 50s. But he probably shouldn't have been in a ring anymore, and we'll talk about the physical ailments of Hulk Hogan in just a little bit. But it was really cool to see them highlight the match between him and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. WrestleMania 17, I think, was one of the greatest double turns, feel the crowd in a Hogan-dominated Toronto, Canada nostalgia match that probably couldn't have happened in any other way, and was, an ipso facto send-off for Hulk Hogan. It probably should have been the last match he ever wrestled, because it does not get better from there. But the way the documentary laid it out, was like Hulk had come back to the WWE again. They were trying to do the NWO thing in the WWE in this invasion angle, but they got there years later, and contracts stipulated that they still had from the WCW when the WWE merged with them, that they didn't have to come to work because the WWE wasn't going to pay the insane contracts that Hogan and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were getting at that time. So it took them a little longer to get there. By the time they got there, the sizzle was off the steak a little bit. But still, they run that angle, and the best thing to come out of it, honestly, was Hulk and Rock at WrestleMania. And again, the cool thing about that match is they show what's supposed to be a heel Hulk Hogan and a babyface Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, where Hogan is the bad guy, is going to put over Rock the good guy. And instead, something amazing happens, and the fans just want to cheer Hulk. And so the Hulk starts working more babyface. He starts firing up a little more. He starts pleading with the crowd. He starts giving the facial and emotions and all of that stuff. And Rock starts working a little more heel. He starts digging in more. He starts giving it to the crowd and snarling and, doing some heelish stuff. And man, and the way the documentary played it out too, they showed like Hulk, hulking up like he would in the 80s, and the crowd rise into a fever pitch when he would Hulk up, and then they transition back almost like cut by cut to line up him hulking up in one match versus him hulking up against The Rock, and that entire thing. And you could tell the way that Hulk described it meant the world to him. That match did. And again, in a documentary where you had a lot of feel-good moments for Hulk, you also have that piece of you in the back of your mind that looks at Hulk, as unfortunate as it is, the way he portrayed himself after post-career and the things he said and did that made you question his character, not just the steroid stuff, but the racial remark stuff, the Donald Trump stuff, right? All of that. And this was a moment where you kind of forgot all that and remembered that this was one of the biggest superstars the wrestling business has ever seen. And he got that adoration, that adulation that I think he deserved in that match from a crowd that wanted to see the Hulk up one more time, drop the leg one more time. And they wanted to see him win, but The Rock ends up with the W. But still, I mean, an amazing match. And it was a really cool watch to see that specific part of it. But Hulk's time at the WWE ends up, running out, and from that point, we're talking like early 2000s, or maybe mid 2000s. We're seeing him get out of the wrestling business for a little bit, and then we see the reality show. Hogan Knows Best, right? And again, you go from some of these home tapes where Linda is the loving mother to a bit of a chaotic situation where you have Hogan, who's obviously he's the dad. That's Terry. Linda's kind of like the quirky, kind of kooky wife. You have Brooke, who's trying to get into the music business. You have Nick, who they've portrayed as like this snot-nosed teenager kid that's always just pulling pranks. But all in all, it was a really, really popular reality show. I remember it on VH1, but it did show the cracks in the family a little bit. It did show that there was a breaking point coming where Hogan was like, listen, I'm making all this money and it's never enough, and everybody's taking advantage of me, the breadwinner, and this and that, and him and Linda splitting apart, and it did get a bit more personal. It did. And that was probably as personal as it gets, is around Hogan's divorce and around the splitting up of the family, right? You don't have Brooke in this documentary, at least on camera, anywhere. She didn't want to be a part of it, clearly. And it showed how low things got for Hulk. Linda has this new boyfriend and like is trying to show him off to Hulk. Hulk cheats on Linda, which it shows Hulk, talking about him cheating on Linda and doing it with one of Brooke's friends, which is super weird, seeing as he's like in his 50s. And then it shows Linda trying to get back at him by having this very young, I think one of Nick's friends, which is weird that they're dating their son and daughter's friends, but she's dating this guy and trying to rub it in Hulk's face, and it gets very, very messy. And then obviously the divorce happens. Apparently Hogan gives 70% or whatever he says. Again, how much can you believe from Hulk? Regardless, he gives a lot of money to Linda to just go away. So he's broke now. He's broke financially. His body is broken. We're talking back surgeries after back surgeries. And again, at one point in this documentary, Hulk talks about how he wish he never started his finish as the leg drop. Because if you think about it, he's in his 300-pound era throughout the 80s, damn near. As a finishing maneuver, he's coming off the ropes, jumping into the air, and dropping the leg over and over and over for 25 years, 30 years. And they show multiple times Hulk going to the doctors and looking at his spine on x-ray and seeing how curved it is, and it looks like the letter S. It's really bad. He's developed scoliosis, all this, and he keeps having surgery after surgery after surgery. I don't know how bad it was for Hulk. I do kind of wish that there was at least an attempt at physical therapy or an attempt at getting his body right through movement before there was just cutting him open. At one point, they put a battery in his back to like shock him so he's not in pain anymore. Like, it got bad for Hogan. Physically, it got really, really bad. He keeps having, hip replacements and knees and this and that. And I think it was like 11 or 12 surgeries later. Yeah, that's the pro wrestling business, and it comes at a cost. But man, you really see how detrimental the business is on your health, but also how these surgeons just want to cut first and ask questions later. And I think that DDP yoga honestly could have helped Hogan. But again, they're kind of moving fast here. But at that same time, we get Hogan back in the wrestling business as he signs with TNA and Eric Bischoff and that whole calamity. And they show Hogan barely being able to move and him on crutches, and it was just, they skimmed over it because, quite frankly, they should have. It was a good money grab for Hogan because he needed it. He was desperate for money, which is very, very sad. One of the biggest stars in the wrestling business's history was broke, or at least in his words, didn't have any money. But he goes through that era of TNA, and again, it's hard to watch. And then obviously you get the post-wrestling career again for Hogan after the TNA bit, where a lot of the controversies come out, right? The Gawker video, where, Hogan's having sex with one of his friends' wives, and that in its own right is a bit of a scandal, but obviously the racial remarks that come out of that tape. Hogan wins a shit ton of money, right? He wins like $140 million off the Gawker lawsuit, but he also has his character revealed, what he's been saying in private, and people remembered that. They did not forget it. It really, really damaged his reputation. On top of that, they don't even show this, but the massive car accident from Hulk's son, Nick, and somebody got paralyzed in that thing, I'm pretty sure. But obviously some of the words that Hogan said, some racially charged words that Hogan said in that instance, again, just revealing more of Hulk's character that people would not forget. They would not let him just gloss over that in real life. They did in the documentary, which I thought was done in a bit of poor taste, right? They didn't go any further down that rabbit hole. I know Hogan wouldn't have wanted to talk about it, but at the same time, are we doing just a puff piece, or are we doing an actual documentary here, right? From there, you get more of Hogan. Honestly, it seems like deteriorating. There's moments where he's talking about, even in his time in TNA, that he's taken fentanyl, and like copious amounts of fentanyl. And if you guys obviously, the opioid crisis here in the United States, like fentanyl will kill you, even small amounts. And Hogan, again, I don't know if he was exaggerating. He's talking about fentanyl patches he was putting on his legs and candies he was shoving in his mouth. And he says it was at a level that would have killed most people. Regardless of what level it was, the fact that he was abusing fentanyl, it shows you where his physical state was. And so from that point, we get into the latter years of Hulk Hogan, and we get into the politics side, where he is a Donald Trump advocate, right? Known Trump since the 80s, done business with Trump and all this other stuff. But obviously him coming out and doing the entire campaign trail for Donald Trump, and people saying that Hulk got him elected. I don't know if that's the case. I think that was probably more Charlie Kirk and the podcast thing and Joe Rogan. But he comes out and does the speech at the Republican National Convention and tears the shirt off, and he gets that euphoria once again. The people are chanting Hulk's name, and that high he can never get over, no matter no amount of fentanyl patches or anything else. He even says it was like having sex. It was like busting a nut. And those are the moments where you see Hulk light up the most, when he got to talk about the moments where the people got on their feet and they supported him and they chanted his name. That's the happiest Hulk is in most of these interviews, outside of, talking about his kids or whatever. But that's who Hulk Hogan was. He was the superstar that Terry Bollea always wanted to be, right? He was the figment of our imagination, but the person Terry Bollea identified with the most, even more than Terry Bollea identified with Terry Bollea, the person, right? He identified with the character. So you see that happen, and obviously that's very controversial that you see Hulk endorsing the president that is very, very controversial in his own right and definitely divisive and all those things. So when Hogan does have his comeback to the WWE after, being unceremoniously removed from their records and everything else after the Gawker tapes and after the other stuff that was captured of his racial remarks, they welcome him back, and he gets booed out of the building in Los Angeles on his welcome back to talk to the people and his big reintroduction to WWE, because people had seen enough from Hulk. They had seen how he was as a person, again, on some of these audio tapes and some of these remarks that he made and the endorsement of Donald Trump. And you can't do that in Los Angeles, bring him out and think he's going to get the hero pop. People booed him, and it hurt him. But at the same time, what did you expect? People had seen what they wanted to see, or seen enough of Hulk to make a judgment. And it was more so probably about the fact that the way that Hulk handled a lot of the controversies, handled his remarks and things like that, where he wasn't very remorseful. He wasn't remorseful enough, I guess, or whatever. But then obviously we get into the latter years of Hulk Hogan. We see him remarry to his second wife, and ultimately the documentary is not finished, or maybe it was, but just after Hulk's, they do this sit down with Hulk, and they're like, okay, we'll revisit this in a couple of months. He ends up, I think after another one of his surgeries, he ends up having a heart condition, goes to the hospital, and unfortunately he passed. And the documentary team goes and talks to some other people like Triple H and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Jesse Ventura after Hogan passes and gets their reaction from it. And this is probably the most consequential part of the documentary for me because it puts everything back into perspective. You know, Hogan was not liked very much by the mass audience by that last kind of portion of his life. Now, there was also a mass portion of people that did like him, but the vocal social media, the vocal, fans in the arena in Los Angeles, he wasn't held in very high regard, nowhere near what he was, right? After those comments and everything came out, what you see is how the wrestlers held him. Even the ones that didn't like him. Cody Rhodes is talking about it as well. The respect they had for Hogan as a performer, as someone that without him, most of these people aren't making the money they are making today. The business is not in the same place that it's in today. You see the raw emotion from those people. You see Jesse Ventura, I just talked about it a second ago. You see the most, I think, polarizing line from the entire documentary. He said, watching Hulk pass, the immortal Hulk Hogan pass, it made you feel real mortal. Because that's the Hulk. He doesn't. He's Iron Man, right? He's the immortal. And he said, watching him pass on made you feel real mortal. And that was like, whew. That was one of those things I had to pause the documentary. That was the most powerful moment, I thought, of the documentary. And they show the WWE honoring Hulk and giving him the 10 bell salute, and Triple H talking about it, and Bruce Pritchard getting emotional about it, and like I said, Hacksaw Jim Duggan getting emotional. But all in all, was this a puff piece of Hogan? For sure, right? Like it was meant to show that the highest of highs. It was meant to show this larger-than-life individual that ended up taking over the pro wrestling business in Hulk Hogan. But it did have some moments, if you weren't around in the 80s, that you got to live for the first time. And if you were around in that time, you got to relive of Hulkamania. It showed you the family man Hulk. It showed you him sparingly going through some hard times. And then it showed you the detrimental cost of the wrestling business and how much it physically weighed on him and how much it changed his life for the good and the bad. And ultimately the passing of Hulk Hogan. And I think out of everything there, I will say I developed a lot more respect for the contribution to the business that Hulk had. And I knew that he was one of the best ever. I knew that he was a lifetime Mount Rushmore wrestler. And I knew that Hulkamania ran wild, and I knew that they changed the world, but I didn't maybe take into account how much it changed wrestling, how much it allowed for wrestling to even go to another level just a decade later, and how much without Hulk, Vince McMahon probably doesn't go national with the WWE. Like, he probably fails in his expansion. WrestleMania, if that first one's not a success, the wrestling business probably is in complete disarray, and we never get to where we are today. So, coming out of this, would I have liked to see more about, Hogan directly talking about some of the more challenging things, right? Like the more devastating things he said and did post-career? Yeah. But was I okay with the way it was made? Because ultimately it was a celebration of Hulk Hogan, the real American, versus like an actual in-depth look at the entirety of his triumphs and faults. Yeah, I was fine with it. And it did give me another reason to go back and fall in love with pro wrestling again and remember a time where it was still pro wrestling and not, just sports entertainment. But anyway, that's my take on it. I don't know if this is a good review or not. That's what I thought of the Hulk Hogan documentary. I think it was surface level. I think it was lacking the details, and I think they did let Hogan get away with being Hogan again and embellishing on certain things and talking about things in a certain way and not having to answer the tough questions or not necessarily going through and telling the truth about things that were either absconded or just passed over in general. I do wish they had more of Hulk's daughter, Brooke, in there to give some nuance to a lot of the things that happened, again, post-career for Hulk and all of that. But all in all, I thought it was a good documentary. And I thought it was a pretty tasteful look at how Hulk changed the business, even if they didn't fully go into how personally people felt about the Hulk later on. Maybe that's needed, maybe it isn't. You guys let me know in the comments below. But there it is. Hulk Hogan's Real American. What'd you think about it? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What did they miss? I don't have those answers, but guess we'll find out.